You're in this picture with Shanice Harlan's Kilgore. You're hugging. It's Saigu 30 years anniversary. Can you tell me a little bit about what exactly is happening in that picture, how that day came about, what you're feeling, what is happening on that day?
Well, actually, it's not just that day, but events that led to it.
Now we've gone kind of back a little bit first to kind of look at the triggers of Saigu. We know that was a very painful event. We've learned about that event, but now let's fast forward. Let's fast forward not just 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. You've been doing this work for a long, long time now. Why are we remembering Saigu? That's 32, 33 years now. Why are we remembering Saigu?
Well, unfortunately, I think the narrative that was really amplified during the LA riots and that demonized, particularly the Korean American community, has had some, I don't even want to call it residual. I feel like it continues to grow, right? And I believe that the current growing anti-Asian hate and violence has come from not addressing and not resolving the false narrative or the incomplete narrative that has really demonized not just Koreans, but I would say even Asians in this country. And that really has pitted, especially Black and Korean or Black and Asian communities. And so I think it's really important, again, that we're not blinded by the narratives that are told to us or told to one another, and that we could really open our eyes to the fact that we are all victims of a very oppressive, racist, systemic system that continues to keep those who are not in power to be not in power. Power does not relinquish, right? As well.
I'm so glad because I was just in Korea not too long ago, and I remember hearing a quote that if you don't know your history, you don't have a future. And then, of course, there's that American proverb of if you don't know your history, you're doomed to repeat the mistakes of history.
Absolutely. Right? Absolutely.
So there's something definitely to remember in this. But before I do, I kind of want to take us to kind of maybe a joyful moment. It's that picture of you. You're in this picture with Shanice Harlan's Kilgore. You're hugging. It's Saigu 30 years anniversary. Can you tell me a little bit about what exactly is happening in that picture, how that day came about, what you're feeling, what is happening on that day?
Well, actually, it's not just that day, but events that led to it. But in that moment, the organizer, John Bryant from Operation Hope, who's African American, was hosting the 30th anniversary commemorative event at the intersection of Florence and Normandy, where the riots really broke out. And I have to say that probably I was the one Asian in the room or in this open space where the press conference was being held with the mayor, with Shanice Latasha Harlan's cousin, but also COO of Latasha Harlan's Foundation. There was also Lorna King, Rodney King's daughter. There was the former Congresswoman, oh my gosh, Diane Watson, and Karen Bass, who was at the time, not mayor, but running for mayor, but also I believe was, a Congress member. So we had a lot of key individuals, including another activist, Naji Ali, who was very active in not being happy with the Korean community during the LA riots as well, and a number of other folks, including the mayor of LA City, Eric Garcetti. And at that moment, the organizer called me out. I had spoken. I was one of like 5 or 7 individuals who were able to say a few things. And I had just actually stated that the LA riots, and I said for the Korean community, was a riot. with 2,300 businesses, Korean businesses destroyed and devastated, which represented over 60-something plus percentage of the businesses that were destroyed, with almost, $500 million property damage, and, over 4,000 national troops coming in to restore order. And so for our community, it was a riot. And I also stated that it was the largest incident of anti-Asian hate and violence. And, I did take a gulp before I did say that. I chose to state it because I wanted our narrative, our experience as Korean Americans to be also lifted up and recognized and acknowledged. And at the same time, I did also end with the story of the Squid Games. I believe I shared earlier, but that the game master had set a game in which the players, the only way that they could win was by hurting each other. And it was only at the end when two lifelong friends who ended up as the finalists, and they were pummeling each other to death. And one friend was going to be the winner. And as he started to go towards really his prize winnings, he woke up and realized that winning was going to come at the cost of the life of his friend and his own integrity of humanity. And one of the rules was that if all the players agree that they could exit the game. And that's what this final winner said. You know what? We don't have to play by these rules. We could exit. Let's go home. And I did conclude to say, we've been pitted against one another, but we could open our eyes and, not play by these rules. So I did end in a statement of solidarity, but also I did tell some hard truths. And so I was so grateful and honored that at the end of that presentation, that the organizers chose to use a very precious time in which they should get all the spotlight to actually be so generous and to say, hey, we want you to come to the podium and we have a gift for you. And then the organizer, John Bryant, and actually he gave credit to Robert Sacido, who was also one of the nonprofit organizers who gave the idea, and said, Shanice Harlins, Lorna King, Naji Ali, I want you to give Haypen a group hug. And that was the moment that was captured, and it ended up on the front page of the Los Angeles Times. Another piece, though, is that when Shanice, a little bit earlier, when she was speaking, she presented the T-shirt with her cousin, Latasha Harlan's photo. And as she was presenting it, that shot was also captured, and it was also on the front page of the, I think it's called the Sunday section or whatever, the California section. So someone told me that no one ever ended up on the front page of the main page and the California section, but it was truly meaningful. And I have to say that even a more meaningful moment was actually we had invited Shanice to join for our closing event of our Saigu campaign, in which we did series of events that evening. And then Saturday morning, she sent me a text saying that yesterday was a breakthrough, and that she was sending massive respect and gratitude, and that if I needed anything, to reach out to her. And so I was really, really grateful. But the earlier piece that was leading to that was that my friend Naji Ali, as mentioned, we had done as an organization the commemorative event on the 20th, 25th, and 30th. And on the 25th anniversary, as we're organizing our events, and Naji Ali was one of the activists who also joined in this effort. he suggested that I reach out to Latasha Harden's family. And knowing how the narrative was bent, in a certain way that really, I would say, continued to demonize the Korean store owners, I didn't feel any, what's the word, motivation in touching something that could really have a huge backlash, right? And I didn't feel that there would be any kind of coming up together or understanding. And so when he made that suggestion, I just kind of tossed it, right? It's kind of like when donkeys fly, like, oh no, I'm not going to touch that. But on the 30th anniversary, I remember reaching out to a friend in the Black community, and I said, "What do you think what do you think it would take to bring our communities together?" And she said, when the Charleston African American Church in South Carolina was killed by Dylan Roof, that so many members got killed that the church members expressed forgiveness for Dylan Roof. And she said that she thought that it would take something like that for our two communities together, right? Come together. And I'm thinking, I don't know if that means the Black community would apologize or the Korean community would apologize, but I just couldn't, again, fathom that. But for some reason, as she was saying that, something rang true, and I felt like there was an assignment from God. And when Naji Ali suggested that I reach out again on the 30th anniversary, I held it with me, and I thought, oh, you know what? I had heard that Shanice Harlins was going to be speaking at a function, but when I actually heard the recording, it didn't seem like she was really receptive, and she had a certain set narrative. And so I thought, oh no, the last thing I want to do is touch it and then create more problems and go nowhere. But as I said, I did hold on to it as a burden, actually, because it felt like God was telling me to do something that I really, really was reluctant and hesitant to do. But I really held on to the Bible verse that said that God had not given us a spirit of fear, right? But of courage, right? And of sound mind and discipline. And that I also held on to the promise that God would give us words to say when we didn't have words to say. And so again, after much, much, much pressure that I put on myself, knowing that it was from God, that I finally picked up the phone. And I have to say that when I picked up the phone, I still didn't know what to say. And the last thing that I would have ever imagined was to be able to have an opportunity where I could even share some of the realities and data of these Korean business owners. But, praise the Lord, when I picked up the phone and I shared who I was, Shanice Harlins was really open and receptive. And, and we were able to share some of the journey that we had gone through as a community, and for her in terms of her loss for her cousin. And, it got to a point though where at the end, she was really again trying to encourage some positive actions that would really bring the community together. And so she was suggesting that the store owners should come out to the community and join community barbecues and, more of that. And because I did feel comfortable with her, I had a certain level of comfort that I started to laugh. And I said, Shanice, you know what? I bet these store owners would love to come out to these community barbecues. But I had just shared with you that they literally do work 16-hour days, 7 days a week with no holidays or weekends. And so, when would they really have the time to be coming out to these community barbecues, and they're making so little income, and we just ended up having a good laugh. And in the subsequent period, I was invited by Spectrum to charter, their television, to be able to come and speak about the LA riots. And another friend named Vinny, who helped to set this up, a former KCAL president, African American, suggested that I invite Shanice with me. And again, we did have a very powerful, meaningful conversation. This is before the day of that photo op. But I thought, gosh, and I was receptive in terms of inviting her. And but I thought that we would have the opportunity to connect and make sure that we were all on the same page, right, about solidarity and about peace. But I had so many events and planning and media interviews, that there was really no time. And this event the interviews at 7 a.m. in the morning, right? And originally we were supposed to be in studio, but for various reasons, we had to do a virtual interview. So like Shanice and myself, we were squeezed into this current like camera space right here, right? And I did my little thing, and I was about to share a little bit more, and then they cut me to Shanice, right? And I'm going, oh boy, we had no conversation. I'm not sure what she will be saying. But again, she really did speak about, peace, working together, etc., and for which I was very grateful. And then that morning at 10, we were on a bus tour together, and then the press conference at Florence and Normandy. And that was really the photo op that occurred. And that evening at the church in, Tapestry, LA, we had few hundred people come together, elected officials, former gang members, the Koreatown individuals who helped to defend Koreatown store owners, children, the LAPD, fire department. We had, again, just the faith leaders, just the whole gamut of leaders and communities, right, who had been impacted, to really, again, lift up, share our wounds and pains, but also, again, to express our strength in unity and solidarity. And then again, the next morning, Shanice was able to send that note, that text message, for which I was so grateful. And subsequently, we've been able to stay connected, and we were able to connect. She wanted to start a business, and we were able to connect actually with a business incubator at Tapestry, LA. They help, there's many Korean small business owners, and so they had a cohort that they were teaching in. So Shanice was able to start in that process as well.
What a story of hope. What a story of great courage. I know, Hapen, you've been in the community, so you've heard so many stories. You felt the pain. You probably cried with so many who have lost so much during the last 30 years. And then I felt your struggle of reaching out and what would happen from that space. But yet it just seemed like you had hope, you had faith, you leaned in with the best that you had. And somehow in that encounter, it was used in a good way. And now when I look at that picture, it's really a picture of hope. Certainly it's not the answer to the problem, but there's something about that that brings so much hope and joy to me. In that article I read, if communities are to go together, you said this, I think we need to understand the context in which both our communities have also been the victims of factors beyond their control. What do you mean when you said that? And then what do you think the next steps are as we are now pushing beyond 30 and then as we head into 40? What do you think the next steps might be?
Well, I think that there are so many opportunities when people open their eyes and hearts. And as an example, I share that Korean and Black homeownership rates are the same. And the Hispanic homeownership rate is not far off. And so and as an organization, we could help individuals with up to $300,000 in down payment assistance. And people may know that in U.S. Our history, that the bulk of middle class have been able to build their wealth through homeownership. There's a $200,000 difference in wealth between renters and homeowners, which is about 40 times the difference, right? And unfortunately, the efforts that the government had made really benefited only the white community and really left the communities of color behind. And so I believe that a lot of the pain that we suffer currently comes from poverty, from lack of wealth. When you have wealth, you could pursue higher education. When you have wealth, you could launch a business. When you have wealth, you could wait around in selecting the right job, right? Versus just grabbing what first job offer that comes along. And whether you have a health crisis or business failure, if you have wealth and reserve, then you could kind of hang around until you figure it out. But unfortunately for communities of color, including AAPI, but Black, Brown, Native Americans, many of us don't have that reserve. And when you don't have that reserve and you come to desperate times, there's going to be things that you're going to do to save your family, to save your life, whatever it may be. And we also end up not being in positions of power, of decision-making rooms where we can advocate for the challenges that we see in our community. And so again, I would say the bulk of many of the programs, initiatives continue to exclude. It's built for someone else that doesn't fit us as Asians, as communities of color. And so one thing that we have done together is to host a home ownership fair, and we partnered with the LA County Asian American Employees Association, the LA County African American Employees Association, the Asian American Hispanic Managers, and the Chicano Employees Association. And we were able to bring this resource to the broad community. I'm also part of organizations or been involved with organizations like the California Reinvestment Coalition, now called Rise Economy, the Green Lining Institute, and there's some new initiatives like the National Alliance for Reducing the Wealth Gap. These are multi-ethnic organizations where we come together, right, and advocate to policymakers, to financial bank CEOs, and we've been able to be successful in having these key stakeholders invest multi-billion dollars worth of investments and commitments for homeownership, for employment, small business, philanthropic dollars to community development like affordable housing. And so I believe that, again, the future, the more we recognize that none of us are free from oppression, we could lock arms to expand our voice, amplify our voice, increase our numbers and strength to create policies that will allow for a bigger pie, right? We don't have to fight over the crumbs, but really fight for a bigger pie so that we could all win. And I could go on so many examples where we've been able to come together. Even, I have so many stories to tell, but Dr. Barbara Williams Skinner, she leads a group, the Skinner Leadership Institute, Faith United for Saving Democracy, to quite a number of efforts. And because we had come to an understanding and her eyes open and her heart open to the reality of the Asian community, that she realized that justice for the Black community cannot happen without justice happening for the Asian community. And she has invited me into many efforts. And when Supreme Court Justice nominee Ketanji Jackson was up, she asked for me and another colleague who's Latino to join in on an op-ed to support her nomination, right? And ultimately she got it, and I was invited to be at the signing ceremony. Unfortunately, I had a scheduled conflict, so I missed that historic occasion. But that's just some examples, right? Of being able to, again, unite our voices for something bigger and greater for all of us.
I think that's definitely a gem that's coming from our conversation, beginning with, hey, just even communicating, having certain folks from various communities begin by just talking to each other and having hope. Then maybe getting to the place, as you're able to share a little bit, to forgive and coming to that space of forgiveness. And then from there, it seemed like you moved to a place of helping. Let's help each other. And then finally to a place of advocating together.
Yes.
I think that's definitely a gem that's coming from this very painful experience.
Yes.
What can we do? Communicate, forgive, help, advocate. And in future conversations, I would love to hear how you have come together, how the many stories, I know you just shared one example, but I know there are many. More of those stories of how you were able to bring different groups of people together for the common good for us all.
Yes. And I do want to add one more thing. I think around Shanice Harlins and her cousin Latasha, I had grown up hearing and still hear kind of the harsh realities of these store owners. So in many ways, I was buried in that perspective. And again, as I've shared, there is a place for acknowledging the harsh reality that many of these store owners face. So, and I will continue to lift that reality because then that will provide better opportunity for better solutions. At the same time, I think that, for myself, I also went through the exercise of just removing color. And I remember thinking, regardless whether my cousin was good or bad, if I had heard that my cousin had gone into a store and tried to buy a bottle of orange juice, maybe she was trying to take it, who knows? But regardless, that she would end up dead, I would be appalled and shocked. And so in that way, I think for all of us, I think there is a space for, where we're so buried in our own narrative, right? Whatever that may be. Maybe it's male versus females, it could be Israeli against Palestinians. It could be like a lot of different spaces where there is this conflict. But I think, again, as being human, we want to go to a default place of saying our narrative is the only correct narrative and everyone else is wrong, right? But I think it's really helpful to, again, remove whatever that lens is, right? That our default lens, and maybe even switch places or just remove that lens and just kind of go through that exercise and say, right? I think that also is one step that could also get open eyes, open hearts for all of us as well.
I think you're absolutely right. We could use more compassion in this world. And one way that happens is by having empathy. And how do we gain that empathy? By hearing one another's stories or putting ourselves in the shoes of another person as you're hearing. And if we can help to maybe take one step in the right direction here in LA, where there are tensions, it's real. And I'm so glad that, Hipin, you don't avoid the real issues. You do address the real issues. If we can address the real issues happening in LA, what kind of impact, and there are some promising practices that come from this. We know it can impact California. We know it can impact the United States. And you're right, there are places all around the world where we could be a light to, but we got to first live it ourselves. Hapen, I know you're flying out to other places in the world, wishing you the best and being the light in those spaces.
Thank you. Thank you, Jeff. It's always a pleasure.